What is everybody? Kyle Murray from FTN Daily back again with another episode of The Optimal presented by FTN Network, and we're live here with some more NBA picks and plays for Tuesday, March 29th. Yesterday was a pretty solid day. Obviously, tons of news, and the three prize picks that we gave out went 2 for 3, and we were one assist from Julius Randle away from having a 3 for 3 day. So hopefully we can go 3 for 3 on today's prize picks plays, but we're going to talk some NBA DFS as well on the DraftKings slate. Again, tons of news from yesterday. It's only a 5-game slate today, so likely not going to have as much news today, but it's still end of season NBA, so I wouldn't expect a slate with no news. But let's head over to the Optimizer now. We actually have quite a few games that are pretty interesting from a DFS perspective or a real life perspective. But let's take a look at the top tier here, sorting by the overall salary. You have Giannis, Luka, Embiid, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Paul George, who's questionable. He could potentially make his return after a pretty lengthy layoff there from the injury. But the headline game is going to be the Sixers and Bucks. And normally I talk the headline game after going tier by tier, but we're just going to talk about it now since there's probably the three only players that you have any interest in really in this particular game in the top tier, right? Obviously with Giannis up at the top, you have Embiid and Harden as well. Now, you do have a little bit of potential secondary interest in guys like Tobias Harris, Tyrese Maxey, but I don't really love those guys. I don't have a ton of interest. I mean, you'd have Middleton and Holiday as well, but with Giannis back in the lineup, not overly confident in those guys. So for me, the headline game, and the reason why I'm kind of deeming this the headline game is because it has the second highest total on the board, 1.5 point spread, and it's two of probably the top 3 or 4 teams in the Eastern Conference. So it should be a really good matchup. But Giannis up at the top. You have Embiid and Harden, all three, in this top tier range. Now, in terms of breaking down the top tier of guys, my favorite of the group is definitely going to be Luka here in the matchup against the Lakers here. Let's pop over to the ADP tool and take a look at this. I'm not sure if I've shown this before on the Optimal, but it's a very good tool. And Luka's honestly a perfect example of why you need to make sure that you are using tools like this rather than some other standard DVP tools, because players just don't really have positions anymore. Like Luka is technically a forward, but he's also playing point guard for the Mavericks. So plenty of ways to notice that there's going to be lots of differences in player traits and all that stuff. And as you can see, it's been a pretty good matchup, especially for scorers and rebounders and superstars against the Lakers. So highly recommend using this tool as much as possible. But that's one thing I wanted to point out. The reason why Luka is my top spend up option, he has the top projection, he is the top point per dollar option in this range as well. He's also the only guy with a 5x or a 5x metric in that point per dollar tier in this top end of spend up options. But Luka is definitely my favorite. And after that, it kind of comes down to breaking down your interest in those guys in the headline game between the Bucks and the Sixers. Of those three, Giannis is definitely my favorite. Then it's probably going to be Embiid because I just think his ceiling is a bit higher, but I think it's very close between him and Harden just because of that price gap. Harden's a lot cheaper than both Giannis and Embiid, and it kind of helps him, make a case. Kind of helps him catch up some ground. I do think those other two have much higher ceilings, but Harden, again, that price gap does make some sense. Now, between the two Nets guys, for me, it's probably just I'm not going to have a ton of interest in Kyrie Irving. And, I think that Kyrie Irving still does have a ceiling even at this price tag. And I do think it's going to be interesting that he will almost always be lower owned than Kevin Durant at this rate. But I don't think Kevin Durant gets a ton of ownership regardless because of the other options in this tier. And like when you look at some of the numbers between Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, even when Kyrie Irving was going on that insane run where he had the back-to-back games of 50 plus points and all that stuff, like looking at the numbers between Durant and Irving over that time, over the past month or so, Durant still has the higher usage rate, still is producing better on a permanent basis, and now they're $500 different in pricing. So personally, I would much rather play Durant, so that kind of leads me to not getting to a ton of Kyrie Irving just because they're so close in price. But that's kind of how I'm breaking down the top tier. Paul George, not playing him. If he plays tonight, which isn't even a guarantee, likely doesn't see any more than 25 or maybe 30 minutes. I don't know. I'm not counting on a ton of minutes from Paul George. He's an easy cross off for me at the $9K price tag. But let's talk about the guys here in this mid tier. Up the top, you have Kristaps Porzingis, you have Rudy Gobert, and you also have Vucevic, Levine, and then DeRozan. So the three Bulls. The case for the three Bulls is pretty much going to be the same every single night. If you want to play one of these guys, I think that they all can produce really strong games, but it does feel like a lot of times those massive ceiling games are going to be capped because of all three of these guys and how involved all three of them are. So right now, I guess my favorite, like independently, would be Vooch, but because of the positional stuff where he's a center, it's probably going to be Levine for me, just because he's a little bit cheaper. DeRozan's usage has been a little bit higher than Levine's, but Levine's permanent production as of late has been a bit better. So I guess Levine would be my favorite Bull. But this next tier, these next three players, Donovan Mitchell, Cade Cunningham, Russell Westbrook, I think that's kind of the next important group of guys in this mid-tier range. Cade Cunningham is my favorite of the three here. No Jeremy Grant. He's going to be out for the rest of the year with an injury. And with that scenario, Cade Cunningham has like a 32% usage. His permanent production goes up pretty significantly. Great matchup here against Brooklyn, who plays pretty fast, and their defense has kind of fallen off of a cliff, to be fair. So I really like the spot here for Cade Cunningham. He'd be my favorite. Then you have Donovan Mitchell and Russell Westbrook, who I think these two are pretty close. Obviously, Westbrook has been very, very bad this season. But when you look at some of his numbers with no LeBron and no Anthony Davis, the numbers still look pretty solid. He has like a 34% usage rate, like a 1.25, 1.3 fantasy point per minute. The matchup's pretty tough, but it's also pretty tough for Donovan Mitchell as well. So these guys, I guess I would say, is sort of a tie for me. But if I had to break the tie, I'd probably side with Donovan Mitchell here. I just, even in the games where we've seen Westbrook with no LeBron, it's been pretty ugly for Westbrook pretty much just all year long. And like I mentioned a couple games back where we had LeBron on the sideline, 45 fantasy point game from Russell Westbrook there. So again, it's sort of like a tough tiebreaker for me to pick, and it does also feel sort of weird that Cade Cunningham is such an easy selection there, but I do think he's going to have the biggest increase in his expected roles. So Cunningham is my favorite, followed by probably, I guess I'll say Westbrook to break the tie, and then Donovan Mitchell. But those three I do think are all pretty strong plays, and that's kind of where I'd be going in the mid-tier, either those three or Kristaps Porzingis. It's also a really good spot for Rudy Gobert if you're not using one of the two spend-up options up top at center, and maybe you have Porzingis in the power forward slot. There's quite a few really cheap centers that I also really like that we'll talk about here in a minute, but Gobert, really good matchup for him, as well as the Clippers. When you look at the ADVP tool, really struggle against rebounders and rim protectors, so it should be a very, very good matchup here for Gobert, which doesn't really do a whole lot on the offensive end, and that's, again, sort of why you want to use tools like the ADVP tool, because it's going to show us how they're doing against certain traits and not only against certain traits rather than just positions, because Rudy Gobert is a center, but Rudy Gobert is not the same player as Kristaps Porzingis, who's also a center, right? And I do want to pull up the ADVP tool again because I didn't refresh it before showing the Luka Doncic, and the matchup's actually even better than the numbers that I showed just a minute ago for Luka. So fantastic spot here for Luka. And while we're at it, let's pull up the numbers for Russell Westbrook against the Mavericks. I'm curious to see what we can get here. So primary ball handler and crafty finisher, pretty brutal matchup as you can see there. Now let's look for Donovan Mitchell versus the Clippers. Okay, so the matchup much better for Mitchell. So now I'm reconsidering my thoughts there on I'm gonna flip it. I'm going Cade Cunningham and then Mitchell and then Russell Westbrook in that mid tier there. And I also think that we might see a lower ownership number over on Cade Cunningham because of the fact that you do have Westbrook and Donovan Mitchell right there. But let's head over to the value tier here. And like I mentioned, let me pop back over to the optimizer. Like I mentioned, quite a few good centers in the value section. And you're looking at the first four players in the player rater below 6K. It's Drummond, Bagley, Howard, Gafford, all have center eligibility. So it's very easy to find some salary relief at the center position today, in my opinion. I really like Drummond a lot. He played 31 minutes last game. I think that's probably like his ceiling for minutes, but overall, you can always expect that upside to be there for Drummond, even in limited minutes, just because he's so good on a permanent basis. Bagley also very good on a permanent basis, but now with no Jeremy Grant in the picture, you're probably expecting a good amount of minutes for Bagley, and the minutes just feel overall much safer. He's played 34 minutes in back-to-back games now, and he scored 25 real points, 25 actual points or more in back-to-back games as well. So Bagley and Drummond, I like a ton. If you're looking to save even more salary there, Howard, if he's back on the starting lineup, makes some sense. His permanent production with LeBron off the floor has been very, very good. And now, with that being the case, it kind of just goes to show how he's been producing when he's the center on the floor, and it's been pretty good. So those are the three top value plays of the day. But let's head over now to the PrizePicks tool. Let's look at some of the where we can find some projected edges here based on comparing our projections to the PrizePicks lines. So first pick on the board is Ivica Zubac over 1.5 assists, and this one's kind of a strange line because he's averaging about 1.5 on the year. But when you look at some of his recent play, he had 6 last game, and dating all the way back to March 8th, he's had 2+ assists in all but 3 games. He's actually had 3 games since March 11th. And when you see these recent trends pop up like that, like where a player had 6 assists last game, or 4 or 5 games ago he had 4, and then 5 games ago he had 4 as well. Like when you're seeing those kinds of trends pop up, you typically see lines shoot up. So like 1.5, this number staying at 1.5 is pretty unique in my opinion. Now, I don't think like he is someone that is going to continually project to go over this if you look at some of the season-long stuff, but when you're looking at some of the recent performances, the line makes a little bit more sense there. So 1.5 assists for Zubac, and again, with PrizePicks, you don't necessarily need to worry about the lines, or I guess the juice you can call it. So let's look at some of the numbers on sportsbooks for his assist prop. So we can actually use the prop shop over at FTN bets, and over on DraftKings now 1.5 minus 120. That's typically looking like this feels like a bit more of a coin flip scenario. So we're getting a little bit better of an edge betting this on PrizePicks rather than on the books. But next play is going to be Spencer Dinwiddie over 3.5 assists. His assist numbers have actually gone down quite a bit since the trade, but he's still averaging over 5.3 assists per game. So this being a number at 3.5 is just a very low number due to some recent play. In his last 5 games, he's been under this number in all but 2. So that's kind of an example as to why the number is falling. He's obviously going to see dips in usage when Luka's on the floor, but the same things that we just talked about with Luka and it being a great matchup for him all apply to Dinwiddie as well, who's going to be a guard against the Lakers. So like this matchup here for Dinwiddie. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about a former MVP, Giannis here. His assist number has been pretty strange throughout the course of the year. Honestly, it's gone up and down. At sometimes it's been at 4.5 on sportsbooks. Other times we've seen 6.5, which is a pretty the ebbs and flows of Giannis's assist line have been pretty heavy. So at 4.5, I like this number quite a bit. He's averaging, just shy of 6 on the year, 5.8 assists per game on the year. And like I mentioned, there's been times where he's consistently had a 6.5 assist prop total on certain sports books. So those are going to be the 3 picks of the day, going back to 3 assists. Hopefully we can go 3 for 3 today. But that is going to do it for us. We will see you guys tomorrow for some PGA. Hopefully you all have a good one, and best of luck on your Tuesday night of picks, plays, props, whatever you're doing. Hopefully you can cash it and get some money back for some PGA stuff, because guess what? We have the Masters coming up pretty soon. Not this week, but next week. It's going to be a fun time. So hopefully you guys are staying tuned for that, and you're pumped for that as I am. But we'll see you guys tomorrow. Until then, good luck.